Today, for our first interview with a legislator this legislative session, is Representative Julie Emerson. Julie chairs the House Ways and Means Committee, and she will be sharing with us today her perspective on Constitutional Amendment 2 from the March 29th ballot. And we will be talking to her about her views on the future of the state budget and taxes as well. Before we get into all of that, let me read the scripture of the day. It's First Timothy chapter 3, verse 16. And I have it right here. Let's see. It says, "For the mystery of righteousness is truly amazing. He was revealed as a human being and as our great high priest in the spirit. Angels gazed upon him as a man, and the glorious message of his kingly rulership is being preached to the nations. Many have believed in him, and he has been taken back to heaven, and he's ascended into the place of exalted glory in the heavenly realm. Yes, great is this mystery of righteousness." And this verse is the story of Jesus, and it was a confession and a hymn of the early church. And as we are nearing the end of Holy Week, let me encourage you to make a point to spend time reading the scriptures and meditating on Jesus' finished work of salvation through his death on the cross, his burial, and his resurrection. The entire Bible points to Jesus as the holy and only perfect sacrifice who determined before time began, before speaking creation into existence, that he would come to rescue and redeem us from sin. Romans 10:9 and 10 says that if we confess with our mouth and believe in our heart that Jesus is Lord, we will be saved. And 1 John 1:9 says that if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. It is that simple, and it's that mind-blowingly transformative. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 32, Jesus said that if we acknowledge him publicly, he'll also acknowledge us before his Father in heaven. But if we publicly deny that we know Jesus, he will deny us before his Father in heaven. So as we move into this weekend that celebrates the resurrection of our Savior, there's no better time for us to than to excuse me, there's no better time to make sure that we've gotten our hearts right with the Lord.
Danielle, the Holy Week has always been the most poignant week of the year for me, personally, because of everything that Jesus went through. It's amazing how on Palm Sunday, speaking of people being fickle, on Palm Sunday he goes into Jerusalem with a triumphant reception, and then 3 or 4 days later, he's being crucified. And it's just extraordinary the extent to which the public sentiment changed when they realized that he was not the warrior Messiah that they expected, someone who was going to come in and liberate them from Roman oppression. The kind of liberation that he was bringing was a spiritual, a heart liberation and a heart conversion. But I'm always struck by how quickly people turned on him. And he went from being completely celebrated to completely reviled in 4 days. And that's always poignant, and then suffered an excruciating death on the cross for us. And so it's always an important reminder during Holy Week, as you said, to stay close to God, to spend time with Him, and particularly in the Scripture, this week of all others. And speaking of someone who knows about what people being fickle is all about and how transient people's loyalties can be, Representative Julie Emerson joining us on the State of Freedom for the second time, I believe. Julie, what a pleasure to
That's
have
right.
you with us today.
Yeah, thank you. What a fun segue there, Chris. No,
Uh,
look,
exactly. I
look,
didn't
I'm
even know what
always,
it was going to be.
yeah, look, your verse really spoke to me because I'm always amazed that, the Lord of Lords humbled himself and became a man and came down to this earth with us, and to walk among humans, as imperfect and as fallible as we are. And I don't know if you guys were able to go to the prayer breakfast yesterday morning, but I was there, and Billy Graham's grandson, Will, was the keynote speaker, and it just reminded me that, sometimes, and I think all of us on this call can certainly identify with, we are passionate about what we do, and we work very, very hard to try to make this state a better place. Maybe sometimes we don't always agree on that, but we all have a mindset to make this state a better place. And sometimes you can do the hard work and put the hard work in, and absolutely 100% believe that you're right. And it doesn't always work out sometimes, but I'm reminded that we are nowhere near as perfect as Jesus was. Absolutely no one is. We are completely sinful and not without blame, but he was the most perfect human being that ever walked this earth, and they chose Barabbas over him. So
Yeah.
you just gotta keep the faith and keep the fight up.
Yeah, so true, so true. And even on the cross, he's still his posture was one of love and invitation, even forgiving a
Absolutely.
criminal on the
Yeah.
cross who belonged on the cross, unlike Jesus. Today you will be with me in paradise. That's just one of the most moving
Yeah.
passages of all Scripture. Um,
He
but
died for many, many imperfect people.
yes, he died, including all of us, for sure. Um,
That's right.
Julie, let me ask you, segueing here into Constitutional Amendment 2, probably the most publicized constitutional amendment that I can recall. Everybody seemed to have an opinion on it. You and I and Danielle differed on that constitutional amendment, not on all of it, but on significant parts of it. And as we know, it was defeated. Um, what lessons, if any, were learned in that process, procedurally, substantively? Now that you've had some time to reflect on it, what have you learned from that process?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and this is my 10th year in the legislature, and in all of my time here, I have certainly learned that um, big ideas and big reforms, a lot of times you have to keep bringing them, multiple years, multiple debates, making multiple changes to get big reforms across the finish line. Of course, in this case, these were constitutional changes, and so you have to go a little bit further, and you have to get approval from the people. It's not just a legislative instrument, and so I have to say I've probably learned some of the most valuable lessons I've learned in the legislature throughout this process, and I'm appreciative of it. We took a big swing. We had a lot of ideas that we wanted to make some changes to the Constitution to hopefully move our state forward. We need some fiscal reform measures. I think we could all agree on that.
Yeah.
Um, but we took a big swing, and obviously we didn't. We swung for the fences and did not get a home run on that, and that's okay. I was a little sad on Saturday night, but then Sunday morning I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, and really had a lot of really good conversations. One was with you, Chris, and kind of going back and forth, trying to learn, where we went wrong. And was it just the proposals? Was it the way that we did it? Was it certain things in the proposals? And I think it was a little all of the above. But certainly I heard from many, many people, and including a lot of folks that are involved with the organization as well, that hey, I really liked 90 to 95% of this. It got a lot of things in this were really good. Just couldn't live with one or two things, or whatever it was, and would like to see it broken up a little bit differently, and debated a little bit more. And so I really, even though it was challenging, because sometimes the debates were not always nice, which hey, most of them are not, but and that's okay. But I think that we each saw a tremendous amount of engagement from the public, which is awesome. Even though sometimes it's a bit vitriolic, I would rather more engagement than nothing. So hey, we can handle all of the different types of engagement as long as we're getting feedback from people, and I really think that we did. I had many members of the legislature call me right after and say, "Hey, look, I'm getting so many phone calls about this from people. This is kind of what they're saying. These are the things they'd like to see changed." Obviously, you guys know the property tax exemption on nonprofits was a really big topic of conversation. That kind of, I think, was sort of the first thing that caught people's attention, that caused some concern. And honestly, not that anybody particularly cares about my personal feelings on this, but that one was very difficult for me because I mean, look, I'm a believer. I grew up in the church. I would absolutely never do anything to try to hurt churches. I think unfortunately our intentions going into that um, were not nefarious, but certainly understand um, how people had concerns over it. Unfortunately, it just after it passed in November and it was on the ballot, you can't make amendments after it passes the legislature, and so we did try to address the concerns that were brought about while we were debating it. But so look, I take those to heart, and I understand that we made mistakes there. We need to clean that up. That was not something that people wanted, and that's fine. I again, certainly never our intention to hurt churches, certainly never our intention to even put them in fear of being taxed in any way. So I'm sorry that happened. That's all I can say is I
Yeah.
apologize that happened, but we're going to move on from that and hopefully do better this time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
Julie,
it's all about humility, and you've demonstrated humility in the process, and that's how we get better and that's how we grow. And Julie, the fundamental concern that we had about the amendment was not even so much the substance of it, because there were some very good things in it. We made a comparison between the actual ballot language, which I don't think you drafted the ballot language. I don't think you were responsible for that. I think the legislature approved the ballot language, but there just appeared to be some substantial differences between what was articulated on the ballot and what the proposed amendment actually did. And our position simply was that regardless of how you vote, and everybody has a right to vote how they want, one thing that's fundamentally important is that people know what they're voting on. And I wish we lived in a society where everybody would go read every bill. We read a lot of bills, but most people don't, quite frankly, and most people rely on ballot language to determine how they're going to vote. And we just found the ballot language itself to be somewhat confusing and in certain ways inaccurate or incomplete. And we just thought that was important as a matter of precedent, that official ballot language be reliable, since most people rely on that when they inform their vote. So that was the concern that we had fundamentally. Are there any? And I know in the discussion that you and I had, and I give you credit for this. I mean, you said you can't put everything on a ballot, because that people want to be able to read something that's short and concise. But our position was that you got to put the important things on there. You got to let people know what they're voting on. And are there any thoughts about going forward about making sure that the ballot language includes the most important items in a bill? And is that possible when you're dealing with a bill that's 115 pages long? How do you do that?
Well, look, I mean, this was something slightly unique that isn't done every session, of course. There is an allowable part of the statute that allows us to rewrite a whole article at the same time, which is, of course, what we were doing. And really, the biggest reason that it was that long is because when you do go the pathway of doing an article rewrite, you have to include the entire article in the rewrite. And so that's basically when you put Article 7 on legal paper, it's 115 pages. I mean, I understand that that was very confusing. And unfortunately, with this one, when you did make some changes, there were about 4 or 5 statutory companions. And so, I mean, you probably know this, but, whenever you read the constitutional amendment that we did, um, there was also references to statutory companions, most specifically on the point of the teacher retirement debt payment and the teacher pay raise. There was a question about, is the teacher pay raise really mandated? We don't see the language where it's mandated. Well, that language was not in the Constitution. It was in the statutory companion. And so even still with the whole rewrite, there are other references to other bills as well in the session. So look, I completely understand that can be very confusing. Again, I think this was sort of our um, first attempt to say there are a lot of things in Article 7 we feel need to be reformed. So we're going to try it all in one. Obviously, we were not successful with that. So, we're going to try a little differently this time, try to break it down. We certainly did get a lot of feedback on things that people were concerned about. You and I talked about a couple of items that did not receive as much of attention that you had concerns on, and I think we had really good dialogue about those. I'm not sure if we totally reached agreement on it, but I think we had a good conversation on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, I mean, I think on the ballot language summary, there was no desire to deceive or mislead anybody. It's just we had a whole article rewrite and we tried to fit, every single thing that we, deemed to be the major components of the bill into that ballot language. But certainly understand that everybody didn't agree on that. But we obviously can't have a ballot that's 10 pages long with ballot language.
Well, and Julie, I want to echo Chris's sentiment about your graciousness throughout this process and your openness to conversation and dialogue on this. I think that's one of the most important things, and it's just really appreciated. So thank you for that. This session that we're in now, Representative Kathy Edmonston is bringing a bill, and it proposes to amend the Constitution to bring some clarity to the legislative process around constitutional amendments. So if it's enacted, it would ensure that all proposed constitutional amendments going forward would only address a single object. It's House Bill 471. Have you looked at that? I know
Hmm.
there's over 800 bills, so you may not be aware of it,
Yeah,
but you might be.
no, I've seen that one. Kathy shared it with me, and you know, here's the thing. I'm not going to dance around the issue at all. I mean, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think, but I understand the push because I certainly understand this was probably the first time that we've attempted a whole article rewrite, and so this was really the first time that people had experience with it. And we definitely understand that people weren't comfortable with it, they didn't like it. Um, I I understand from my standpoint that we need to do this particular amendment a little differently. I'm I'm not opposed to Kathy's amendment. I can't tell you for sure that I'm 100% for it yet. I do have a few questions only because um there's been a lot of conversation, and I don't know that I've ever actually gotten a feedback from you guys on how you feel about it. But the interesting thing is when I got feedback after the amendment failed, I saw a whole bunch of people sending me messages on social media saying, y'all just need to do a whole constitutional convention. Just do like they did in the 70s. Just take the convention process, take a year to do it, debate all this, these types of things, open it up that way. I have a lot of reservations on whether or not that could really truly happen because I mean we just saw a rewrite of one article, and there was a lot of confusion on it. And look, I think thankfully these days, and I think you guys would agree, um, even though people they want more transparency from their government, I do think we are operating in a day and age where thankfully there is more access. We're not back in the 70s anymore where you kind of had to have a delayed reaction of seeing what people write in the newspaper. And I mean, you have like real time access to what's going on. A lot of times you guys are in committee and can live tweet what's going on in committees. So I'm thankful for that. I just don't know that we would ever really get to a point of a constitutional convention rewrite because frankly the ballot language for that is do you agree with the constitution that is proposed and written, and that's really the only ballot language. And so we would be asking everyone to do their due diligence and read an entirely new constitution. So I don't think that the article rewrite should be used often at all. But I like the ability to have the avenue to do it. You kind of have like I guess a little bit of a mini constitutional convention in that. But I do absolutely understand that voters, certainly in this particular instance, want things that are more concise, that are to the point, and I'm very understanding and willing on that. So, yeah, I mean, look, I do look forward to looking at Kathy's amendment more, debating that. And I'm not telling you that I'm entirely against it. I understand the outcry from the public of wanting that. So we'll talk about it. I just, you know, as you guys know, when you make constitutional changes, it's hard to change them back too. So
Yeah, and
Yeah.
as you were talking, I have a lot of reservations about a constitutional convention. I'm not sure that's the
sure,
best way forward, even though I
yeah,
do think
absolutely, I do as
that
well.
the convention would be, the Constitution needs some work, and perhaps the answer to this would be that, I mean, as much as we delved into Constitutional Amendment 2 and as much time as we spent on it, it was never posed, at least in my viewing, as a rewrite of Article 7. We know that it was rewriting Article 7, but it wasn't positioned to the public, at least in my view, as a rewriting, as a repositioning, revising of Article 7. And maybe that's kind of where the PR aspect of the legislature comes in and says, hey, we're taking this one crack at a time. We're not trying to rewrite the whole Constitution in one sitting. So, take a look at this through the lens of an article rewrite rather than all of these different measures. That's kind of the way it
Mhm.
seemed. So anyway, just some food for thought.
Yeah. No, no, like I get it. Um, I mean, I think if we did every single component of Amendment 2 as single issue constitutional amendments, I mean, honestly, you'd probably be looking at more than 30 amendments just because it has to go, every time you're doing single object, it's you have to be article, section, line by line, everything.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like maybe we don't need to revisit every single component. Obviously we don't, but but some of the major ones, I certainly would like to see us move forward on that. But
Yeah.
but look, I do get it. That's not necessarily a hill that anybody's wanting to die on. I'm fine if that's what the majority of everyone wants. That just means that we have to do more work, and we know we have to do that. We know we have to do more work to debate it in this session. I hope more people. I think more people are aware now, so I do look for more people to be here as we're debating some of these individual components. And I'm happy about that because the more people are here and have buy-in, then they can go back out and help us do PR on it as well. I mean, I did mention in all of my interviews, about the rewrite, but I get it. There were so many other things that were going on in the amendment that, some people thought this amendment is a teacher pay raise or this
Right.
amendment is only about property taxes or, I mean, there were a lot of components to it.
Well, a lot of people felt going in, even people who did understand what was really going on, they were conflicted, and I feel like a lot of people felt like they were in an untenable position because they're going in being able to choose between perhaps a teacher pay raise, which they may have been in favor of, but eliminating constitutional protection for religious organizations, and so how do you vote yay or nay on something when it has provisions in it that you personally may conflict on? And I think that may be one of the reasons why the one object rule exists, so that people are not put in a
Yeah.
position where they have to make decisions that are that where they have to choose between the greater of two goods or the lesser of two evils on one amendment in that
Well, I
sense.
certainly understand untenable positions. So
Yeah, exactly.
being an antenna,
Spend some
making
time there.
untenable decisions. I always
Yeah.
tell everybody, look, probably the weirdest thing about being in the legislature is when you look at the vote breakdown, and when the public sees how you voted on a bill, they obviously naturally assume that you were either 100% for it or 100% against it. When in reality, you might have been like 51-49. You know,
Yeah. But you
Very,
still have to
very
take a
but
vote.
true.
it's all
In
it's
other
all
words,
part of it.
yeah, you vote.
Yeah.
Sometimes you vote on things with reservations, and you have to weigh a lot
Sure.
of things in the balance. Um, you have a HB 472 this session, which is also seeking to revise Article 7 of the Constitution. The digest itself on that, Julie, and I haven't even read it yet, is 26 pages. Um,
Yeah, let me address that really
yeah,
quickly. So I just want to be very clear about kind of why I introduced that. Um, so of course, the amendment failed on March 29th, and the week following was bill filing deadline week. And I did think it was absolutely worth, and truly based on a lot of phone calls I had, what I would categorize people who would traditionally be in favor of some of the reforms like this, but I mean, like yourselves, who maybe had one or two issues and just didn't feel comfortable with it. Um, all of the phone calls I received were people saying, "Please revisit some of these topics," and so I did feel compelled, based on that feedback, to revisit some of the topics. So what I asked staff to do for me was basically redraft the same amendment, but leave out every topic that was highly controversial. Obviously, we separated out the teacher situation. We separate out the inventory tax. We did not include anything dealing with property tax exemptions on nonprofits. And to have that instrument for me, there will certainly be amendments to that. We will absolutely be taking certain topics out of that, and we'll absolutely be having a conversation of whether or not to move away from the full article rewrite and just do some of these individually. So that was more me trying to have something out there so we can continue the conversation moving forward. I can 100% tell you that that bill is not going to pass right now in its current form. It is set to be debated on Tuesday. I'm working on some amendments to get us to a better place on that. But that's why that's out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And that
I
and that makes sense because you want to make, when you got a deadline to get something filed, you got to meet the deadline, and then it can undergo all kinds of iterations during the process,
Sure.
which I know you've seen many times before.
Yeah, and I know that
Many times.
it seems the public has really woken up in a lot of ways and was paying attention to
Mhm.
CA2, and I think the public engagement on this should be very interesting to watch. I think that I'll be very interested to see how this moves forward. And look, Chris and I are right there with you. There absolutely reform needs to happen in this space. So I'm sure, Chris, you'll be weighing in on this at the legislature, but maybe I'll just switch gears because I know we only got a few minutes left. I want to get your take
Sure.
on Louisiana Doge, because any waste, fraud, and abuse that they find that somehow might require legislative action will need to come through your committee. What's your perspective on how Louisiana Doge is going? Has there been any progress, or there any bills that are being introduced to your committee as a result of their findings so far?
Um, uh, Most likely they would be introduced into appropriations, not necessarily ways and
Okay.
means, but certainly, dealing with all the fiscal matters. I don't know specifically if the Doge Committee is recommending any bills. I do know that there have been quite a few pieces of legislation filed to bring more transparency to the NGO process, which I'm
Yeah,
highly in favor of.
me too.
Um, I'm not going to sit here and give you an absolute of there's no circumstance whatsoever that an NGO would not get um, state funding, but I certainly believe that it should be heavily scrutinized. There should be a lot of thought that goes into that. It should not just be oh, okay, well, that's fine. That member wanted that. We need a lot more scrutiny, and I've seen, man, at least like 5 or 6 bills from different members. Some of them probably do a lot of the same things,
Yeah.
but they bring a lot more transparency to that process, and I think it's highly important. Um, you know, because look, like I said, I'm not going to sit here and say a blanket absolute. There's no situation ever, where we wouldn't give some type of grant to help a particular situation. But think about all the roads and bridges and water lines and
Exactly.
sewer plants and all kind of major government functions that we are supposed to be funding ourselves directly or helping locals with some of their funding or whatever that may be. Um, you know, from my standpoint in my district, I mean, we're replacing all of the water lines in the city of Karen Crow because they're so old and we have brown water. And, we're at capacity because it's the fastest growing city in Lafayette Parish. So we have to build another sewer plant to keep up with sewage capacity, which is a lovely thing to talk about. But, so and all of our roads are falling apart. So
Yeah.
that's the thing we have to concentrate the most on. But look, I absolutely think that I applaud those guys. Yeah, I did not get appointed to the Doge committee, but I love it on the federal level. I love it on the state level. It's incredible some of the things that we have unearthed on the federal level just in a few months, and I'm a big, big fan and big proponent of it. So
Yeah. And
wish the Senate would codify
people on the
that.
state level, Julie, are looking at what's going on the federal level, and they're
Yeah.
just seeing this massive grift and this massive
Hmm.
waste of taxpayer money, massive self enrichment on the part of so many federal officials. It looks like they go into office
Yeah.
making a couple $100,000 a year, and they leave office multimillionaires. And people are going, "How does that happen if they're not benefiting illicitly
Yeah.
from taxpayer money?" And I think that there's a hunger in Louisiana to see that on the state level in a meaningful way, especially when people are literally drowning under the weight of increasing insurance rates and all the costs
Mhm.
and expenses that we have to deal with on a daily basis. It's very difficult to digest when it's very important, let me put it that way, for people to see some meaningful action to expose some of the waste and the fraud in our state government. And, nobody's going to convince me that it doesn't exist and that it's not there, because I'm sure you would agree it is there. We just have
And
to have the
yeah, and look,
will.
I'll
Yeah.
yeah, and I'll tell you guys, it's challenging from a legislative standpoint to make gigantic cuts because you have to get majority of both chambers to agree on it. And I'm gonna follow up with this. We can do it, but we have to have what happens at the Capitol, and you see it because you're here. There will be, anytime you start something with any NGO or anybody, it's very, very hard to pull it back. And I mean,
Yeah.
every government program that starts, everybody loves, right? There's a constituency that loves it, and they show up to fight for their money. And I know as elected officials, we have to fight back on that. But the problem is that you know the people who are there in the audience, obviously they're fighting for the funding they're getting. And we've got to have that counteraction of, hey man, but like we have to fight for the taxpayers who are at work and
Yeah.
can't necessarily be here. But I know that you guys do have a good group of people who are very active, and we kind of need that balance. I think I know it's selfish of me to ask, and I'm not trying to be that way, but it's always positive to have the balance of people, because for every single person that's there to fight for more spending or more programs, kind of the counterbalance of saying, hey, wait a second, like we're not saying, because nobody ever brought a bad program, right? Like they're all good programs. We'll be a little bit
Yeah,
facetious,
exactly.
but everything has a constituency to it. So to have that counterbalance of saying, look, it's a good program, but should the government really be funding it? Because
Right.
because unfortunately we have, and you know I don't know if I feel bad for them or not, but whenever we're talking about the NGOs coming, they'll come and say, oh, but like we do all this great work. I said I agree, but like people should be donating to your organization to keep it
Exactly.
running. You can't always rely on government grants to do it because we may not have the money every year. And frankly, it's really not a core government function.
It's absolutely not a core government function. And if those organizations are doing such great work, then people need to support them individually outside of the tax,
Yeah.
outside of tax funding. I
Yeah.
couldn't agree with you more.
And for the first 200 years of our country's history, or 150 years of our country's history, or probably more, I mean, the founding fathers always recognized that charity really is the function of the individual and of the church. Uh,
Hmm.
it's not really a government function, as you said, Julie. Yet we've established a precedent whereby so many of the nonprofits are being funded with our money. But if you, like Danielle said, if you have a nonprofit and it's doing good work, go sell your nonprofit. Build your nonprofit. You shouldn't be relying on the government for your success, and for your charitable work. So I agree 100%. I know we only have a minute left here, but I have to ask you one last question. I know Neil Reiser, a couple of years ago, had a bill before House for Ways and Means to abolish the state income tax. There wasn't a vote that day on it, but you did express, because I was there, you did express that you believe there is the will in the legislature to
Hmm.
abolish the state income tax. That's a huge issue for many Louisiana citizens. Uh, Dixon McMakin has a bill this session, HB 200, that would phase out the state income tax, but it would not be eliminated until 2040. And so, what are your thoughts
I
on
think we
being?
can beat that.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope so. Is there any reason why it should take 15 years to do it?
No, I actually talked to Dixon about that bill a couple of days ago. I know that he kind of did it in response to what Mississippi did, And Danielle, I think you and I actually had a conversation about the Mississippi bill, and frankly, I hate to toot our own horn about this, but Mississippi did that because of Louisiana going to 3% in November, and they got nervous that they were going to have Texas and then Louisiana on a pathway to zero, and they were going to be kind of stuck out there as a lone party of probably losing businesses to Louisiana. And so, we did get to 3% in November. Mississippi's bill gets them to 3%, I believe, in 2030. And then there's like some trigger language that starts taking effect that with economic growth, they keep phasing it out. So I truly believe that we can beat that. A huge component of the Article 7 rewrite that I will be revisiting is the funds combination for budget and revenue stabilization fund. And really what that does, for me, what that did was allow us to reduce rates, just full out, just reduce rates, because it frees up, in my opinion, we are over collecting on that end because all of this money is being dumped into the revenue stabilization account, but it's not going into the general fund. And so we have to take a 2/3 vote measure to dump it into the general fund every year. So we need that to just be dumped into the general fund because we already have enough in savings right now. We have billions in savings, which is good for Louisiana. We need things in case of emergency, but we don't need it excessively. And so those are recurring taxpayer dollars that are going into that fund that we need to switch over the general fund so that we can go down to 2.5%, 2% and keep chipping away at that, because I do think we can absolutely beat Mississippi to zero. I mean, I hate to be this like deadhead politician that just keeps saying it and never does it, but man, I 100% believe in it because Texas is there and they are seeing major economic growth. Florida is there and seeing major economic growth. Tennessee, we have to get there. I don't think we're ever going to get there with a 1 year 3% to zero elimination. I think we can probably all agree we have to do a phase in approach, but I think we can get there much faster than most people think that we can. I would probably never get enough members on board to take me from 3 to 0 immediately, but I think I can do the step down approach, and I think we can get to at least 2% before I leave here this term.
Yeah. And that is a sincere commitment of yours to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, there are steps we have to take to hopefully, get that funds combination, and because those are funds we already have. Nobody's raising that. That's funds that's already coming into the state that we can use to lower rates, but they're locked up in that fund. So we just need to transfer them to the general fund so we can lower the rate, and 100% commitment that if that happens, I can lower rates immediately.
Yeah.
But look, I think also so many of the changes, we're seeing a lot of economic investment in Louisiana. I do believe our economy is going to start to grow, and that's going to afford us the ability to continuously lower rates as well without doing any policy changes, just a straight rate reduction.
Yeah, with the widening of the base, what do you think about all the bills that seem to be cropping up this session for tax credits for different things? I feel like the broader view should not be, in my mind, to give all these special interest groups tax credits. Why don't we just get rid of the credit and let everybody have a piece of the pie?
Yeah, look, I totally agree. I think my overall view on that, and from looking at what other states do with their, I guess, incentive programs to attract businesses and everything, if you have some type of incentive program, it needs to apply to all businesses, not just one particular type of business.
Yeah.
You've seen there's a lot of states, and Louisiana is moving in this direction, where we have like some little fund that helps with some site selections and helps like run utilities and clear off sites for major investment. I think that's incredibly worthwhile because that's not favoring one industry or another. I think a lot of these credits that we have that favor one particular industry, it's just, and I'm really not trying to pick on anybody, it's just difficult because that means that every other business, every other taxpayer in Louisiana is subsidizing that industry to be here. And so, I mean, if it's a worthwhile industry that's bringing tons of jobs, we can have the conversation, but I just don't know that I know of any that are worth making everyone pay more and more of tax, more of our taxpayer dollars to attract that business here. So
Yeah.
Kind of my overall view on it. We're gonna have a lot of conversations about credits. I've had about 30 phone calls from members saying, "Look, I know we're not doing credits, but I've got this one. It's really good." So
Yeah,
everybody's got this
exactly.
one that's
Right.
really good.
Right. We thank you so much for your openness with us, for your willingness to continue having conversations about this. And as you said at the outset, we may not agree on everything, but we certainly have the same ultimate objective, which is to create a fiscally sound, healthy, prosperous state here. And thank you for your efforts in that regard. And also, just wanted to say on an entirely different issue, Julie, your consistent stance on the cultural and the social issues. That affect our state and affect so many conservatives here. You've always been such a stalwart on those issues, standing strong for the values, cultural and moral values that made our country great to begin with. So thank you for being such a champion on those issues so consistently during your time in the legislature. And once again, thank you for joining us
Absolutely.
today, and we look forward to talking again.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Julie.